represent what I believe to be the full stack of manufacturing. We've got Travis Cox here with Ignition. Ignition probably needs no introduction there. We've got Craig Scott with Fuuz. He'll get more into exactly what that is and what that means and all that. And then we've got Remis here with Concept Reply, doing enterprise integrations for longer than a lot of people have been doing it at all. So we'll see how we talk about, get the conversation rolling here, and we'll kind of let it be a free flow conversation to see where the conversation goes. And to kick it off, we'll just kind of start. I think as the integrator of the three, Remis, we'll start with you. Just kind of talk, if you could kind of kick it off with a little bit of how you used Ignition in the past, enterprise scale, 1, 2, 300 site rollouts, and where you see maybe Fuuz coming in the future, but keep it loose and just kind of let's go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dylan and Tony and Craig and everybody for putting this all together and everybody for jumping on. So yeah, my name is Remis Pop. I've worked quite a bit in the space of manufacturing, kind of started my career as a controls engineer many years ago, and then kind of transitioned more into an IT focused role and kind of getting into MES deployments was kind of the first stab at it. And then kind of now really just focused on the whole space of Industry 4.0, digital transformation, connected factory, kind of unified namespace, whatever buzzword you want to give it nowadays. But really our kind of focus here at Concept Reply is to just work with customers at an enterprise scale to build out and deploy modern smart factory architecture, mostly focused on business value. I think anybody that knows me knows that my sole purpose is to kind of help manufacturing customers drive value with technology. And so, yeah, my journey with Ignition started a long time ago, I think 12 years ago now. And I've kind of worked with it every year since. I've taken it with me to just about every company I've been to. And then I met Craig and the Fuuz team recently and looking forward to kind of what they're building out there. I think there's a huge need for that type of software from an enterprise deployment perspective. So looking forward to see how this kind of all comes together. And yeah, look forward to the partnership and the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, Travis, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So, hey, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I'm Travis Cox, Chief Technology Evangelist for Inductive. Been with Inductive for now going on 22 years. Pretty crazy to think about in there. And when we first started, I was 19 years old, and we were these young kids trying to use SQL databases in industrial world, right? Trying to bring the factory up to more modern times. And here we are, over 20 years later, and it's really exciting to see the movement kind of and how where the industry is going in terms of being able to leverage modern technologies, open standards that are driving a lot of innovation. And now with AI entering the scene, it's just kind of exploding. It's going faster with all of that. And so what's really exciting to me, I would say, is we've always, from the very beginning of Inductive, have been wanting to use standards, whether it's OPC UA, whether it's SQL databases, REST APIs, you name it. Standards are critical, and they're especially critical for interoperability and for things just to be plug and play and just to work, right? And you look today, none of the solutions that we're talking about today would be possible without these standards. And it's really exciting to see all the vendors that are collaborating and to be able to provide true value to customers. Like from a Remis standpoint, he gets to go and look at all these cool technologies that are out there and pick the ones that he wants to put together. And it's not a difficult task like it used to be, where you have to write a lot of code to make that happen. We're able to kind of plug and play these systems. So it's very exciting times, interesting times, and I'd say exciting time to be an engineer for sure, because there's just so much possibility out there.
Definitely. I think a key piece of that was SQL and the factory and all the standards we're talking about there, but we've also got Craig here with Fuuz with much more of the IT side of things. So Craig, you want to jump in?
Sure. Hey guys, thanks for pulling this together. Dylan, you're doing a great job. Just mimicking the chats here. So Craig Scott, I'm the founder and CEO of Fuuz. I first got to know Ignition back in 2014 when I first met Travis. He was the guy that gave me the very first Ignition demo. We became an Ignition integrator. Did that for about 8 years. Alongside integrating Ignition, we were also doing ERP systems and ERP selection. So we were kind of a different system integrator, I think, than most. but we learned a lot about how we could scale from the shop floor to the enterprise. And then that's what led us to building the Fuuz platform. So happy to be here and talk about how we can do this.
Yeah, I think from my side of things, I'll jump in. It's been about 10 years now using Ignition. We were started off doing in SCADA, built into MES, built into ERP integration, and up and down the stack. But spent the first probably 4 or 5 years just on the SCADA side, building HMIs and more controls before getting up into the larger IT world, ERP integrations and all that. But it's a fun group to have here. I think, well, Travis for sure, but all the rest of us are a decade plus in Ignition now and plant floor. And with that, I think Remis and Craig, you can probably talk a lot to what it was like 10 years ago before Ignition and some of these more modern tools like Fuuz and these composable systems. What was that legacy pain point like? And what was it like 10 years ago for some of the people who are just coming in today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start and then I'll hand over to Craig because I'm sure it'll be really interesting to see like the different perspective of it. Because my perspective, I didn't become an integrator until just a few years ago. My focus from day one has always been from the manufacturer side. And so when I was basically given the task of building out an MES system, that was my first exposure to Ignition, because I literally had no experience before that. I was just doing controls and automation work. And I worked for a battery manufacturer here in the Detroit area. And my job was to replicate an MES system in China. So the first thing I did was, literally Googled off the shelf MES, and the typical ones came up. I think it was, the Avivas and the whatever. And then far down the list was Inductive Automation. Well, my first call was Aviva. At the time they weren't Aviva, it was just Wonderware, but called them, and to even just get a quote or to talk to somebody was literally impossible. Like I couldn't even understand what I was getting myself into. And then I kind of stumbled on Ignition. I think I downloaded the 2-hour demo, and then I think within a couple of hours, having a controls background, I was connected into PLCs and was building HMIs. And then, I got the call from Vanessa, who's my inductive automation rep. And I think 2 weeks later, I was in Folsom for inductive automation training. And then I stayed for ICC because ICC was right after the training I was there. And then I stayed another 5 days. So I was in Folsom for 18 days because the week after ICC was also the MES training. At the time, Sepasoft was still more or less part of just inductive automation. And so, yeah, it was wild because at the time there was no software that you could just grab and start building stuff with. You had to buy a license. You had to go through the whole rigmarole of trying to figure out how many tags you were going to use and how many data points you were accessing, what the architecture was good. You had to have all these questions solved ahead of time, which, in theory is not necessarily a bad practice, but for somebody that was just trying to explore, like, okay, what was the art of the possible, right? We talk about art of the possible quite a bit today. Back then, there was no concept of the art of the possible because there was no software that could do it. And so that was kind of my first experience into that first era. It was just, everything was custom back then, right? You had to build custom apps. So the fact that we have this ability now to grab a platform like Fuuz or Inductive or any of the other number of ones out there and just build from day one, it was a theory. It was something that couldn't, yeah, you like that concept plug? It was a theory that you couldn't even practice before. So it's been awesome to see the transition of where we are now to where we were, 10 years ago. Shoot, even 5-6 years ago, really.
Yeah, I think a big piece of that too, and one thing that stands out for me with both you, Remis, and Craig here is, of the four of us, you're the two who have actually been the end user. You've run shops, you've been on the floor, you've been in the factory as that end user. So if we go even further back, Craig, if I'm not mistaken, you were at a fab shop or...
Yeah. I owned a tool and die shop here in the Detroit area. It was family-owned business. And then I went on from that and I started a prototype shop where we did, really high precision CNC machining, laser cutting, stuff like that for the automotive and aerospace industry. So that was where I really got myself into writing M&G code. I was on the floor, setting tools, breaking tools, doing all of the stuff you got to do to work your way up. But I was also estimating and program managing and engineering and writing all the CAM programs and, and looking at how could I help the other guys on the shop floor? My approach to management is always having to know how everything works before I hire someone to do that thing. So that's kind of the way I approached, my learning through my whole career. And it was no different really when I stumbled across Ignition, and same Remis, just the ability to hit download and install and, you're up and running and doing stuff was just really incredible, especially not being a developer myself. The ease of use, even that long ago, was just astonishing. We didn't have AI that could write hundreds of lines of JavaScript in 10 seconds. So, it was just amazing. Like I was in awe the first Zoom that I had, I think with Travis, and I forget the other guy, where you like literally drug an input out on and just dropped it on the screen. And I was just like beside myself because we had like 5 or 6 developers that were just writing code from scratch, on every project we were doing. And we were, spinning up application servers and database servers and replication and SQL here and there. And, it was just so manual and so painful, especially for our larger customers. Just being able to scale that, it was ridiculous. We're always really good at 1 or 2 plants. And then beyond that, it just became monumentally difficult. And we were a small integrator, nothing like Concept. We had like 35 guys. We needed to be able to move on to the next project. And those things became so fragile in nature without Ignition that there was no way to hand it over to the client and have them take ownership. So, Ignition being kind of that initial platform that we started with really gave us the ability to scale projects across multiple sites, get things integrated. We wrote our first Ignition module, I think, in like 2015. So we bridged our Ignition gateways directly to the ERP systems that we were implementing. We wrote all those connectors. So that's really where I got familiar with it. And then I just thought it was so great. Like in an ERP system, they're so rigid. You can't just go in and manipulate tables, right? You can't add columns and rows. I mean, rows obviously, but going in and just making a screen that is user-friendly is like near impossible in most enterprise softwares. Where it was so easy in Ignition, we thought there's got to be something in between, right? There's got to be, as good as Ignition is on the plant floor, what's the middle layer? Because ERP kind of stinks, right? It's too rigid. Ignition might be, no offense, a little too loose in some cases. And we just needed something that kind of like was a shim, right? Like right in between those two things. And so, here we are. So,
Well, I want to say, I think it's really important what you said. Like, Ignition is not going to be everything to everybody, right? It's a toolkit. You could build literally any kind of application you want, right?
Yeah.
It's time and money though, right? Like
Doesn't mean you should,
what
right?
exactly what makes the most sense, right? And there are a lot of obvious strengths with it. And there are parts where you integrating another tool, another platform is going to offer even more value because you don't have, there's a lot, it takes a lot of that guesswork, a lot of that, those man hours out of it. And I think that's a really important thing, right? As you're looking at selecting your stack, you want a stack that is going to provide the value at every level that you want. And that's easy to integrate together. That's the name of the game. And that wasn't how the industry was, right? It was all very proprietary. When we first came in to the industry, it was a lot of people saying, you guys are crazy. There's no way you're going to be successful. You're up against all these big players. And well, all the big players, I mean, they felt like they had the market. And at the end of the day, we're saying, no, there's got to be better ways. There's legitimate pain points. There's got to be ways that we can make this easier. And now kind of, you fast forward today, it's kind of that mindset's there. I'm not going to go and buy software without trying it ever, right? Like that's not how it was in the IT side. It certainly shouldn't be like that on the OT side, right? You've got to be able to evaluate. You've got to be able to put a proof of concept together, see how these things fit together, get some success, understand where you're going to go. And then from there, hopefully you have the foundation where you can iterate on. I think that was one thing that, I know with Remis early on, he didn't know all of the solutions he wanted to put in place, right? Or all the problems that he wanted to solve up front. You're not going to ever figure that out. But what you do know is you got at least one problem you're going to have to solve. You put the platforms in place that you want. In this case, you put Ignition in, and ultimately he was able to build that and then iterate on it. I think that's the most important thing. We're at this time where there's still a lot of unknowns. We're treading new waters. And we have to be able to put things in place that work together and that allow us to continue to evolve and iterate without having to like worry about, oh, am I buying more? Am I going to write a lot of custom code for this and so on, right? It's got to be pretty simple. And I think that's what's really exciting to me is that mindset shift in the industry to where we are today. It's like we can now get to a place of real innovation because a lot of that old legacy thinking is gone, right? We can't do that anymore. So
some would say that's a new paradigm even that Ignition has kind of come up with and is really pushing into the future here. I know that was a big message for the last year here, and I think it's very true.
Yeah, I think the walls of the typical walls of an OT, on the OT side of the fence is really breaking down. Like when you really look at it, for the longest time you had the PLC, you have the different layers, right? The PLC layers, you've got the HMI, you got SCADA, you got MES, you got ERP, you have that, that pyramid, and you never went, you went up the pyramid and you had all these crazy connections everywhere. And it was at the end of the day, you got value, but it was pretty messy, right? Because you realize that data needs to be available everywhere. And where we're at today is these walls are breaking down. Like when IoT came out, like with MQTT and then IoT, all that really gave was the ability to bypass those layers. You put an edge device in that publishes MQTT directly to the cloud, and now I've got value that I can use out of that data without having to, to go through the traditional, layers that were there. And so really it's not about thinking about the layers, it's about thinking about what do we want to do from an architecture, from a data standpoint, what are the use cases we're trying to solve, and how can we get things to work together in a way that that's beneficial, especially getting OT and IT to be more blended and more work together. And that new pyramid or that new paradigm that we're in today is just this new mindset, right? This new way of thinking.
Yeah. I'll take a second too to plug myself and Dylan. I think it's opened the door for the proper solution architect in this space now as well, because before it's always generally just been kind of, we'll fly by the seat of our pants and we'll figure stuff out as we go. But the ability now for companies like Dylan's and Concept is to basically help customers navigate through a lot of that with lessons already learned, right? We've already built stacks with a bunch of different software, a bunch of different packages for a bunch of different reasons. We know what works and what doesn't work, and it's not a one size fits all, right? What works for customer A may not work for customer B. It's a very expensive problem to learn, but it's a very important one to learn. And so the fact that Dylan and I have learned those lessons already, I think is super helpful for a lot of customers to will help you get to that point where you can start to build value right away. Because like you said, Travis, like there are so many now, like the door has been blown open. There's no shortage of software logos in the space. So it's awesome to have the foundation of like Ignition and then building on with what Fuuz is doing. I think this stack is going to continue to grow, and their leaders will emerge. There are always going to be other pieces that will get plugged in along the way, but I think we're starting to kind of see now where that, let's say, reference architecture is really starting to get profound.
Yeah, and it's not just even just the software stack, like the software that you're using in terms of the architecture. It's now how things are being deployed and managed, right? And Kubernetes is entering the scene. You've got obviously change management people want to do, and DevOps procedures that they have, and all of that. That's all brand new in this space, in the OT side, right? May have been pretty familiar on the IT side for if they were building their own softwares in house or whatever, but now it's entering in a big way, and there's tons of orchestration platforms and tons of different tools that you could leverage. And so how do you put it together? How do you make that work? Because there is complexity in it, right? And learning new tools, but there's also a tremendous power in what you can do once it's in place, like in terms of scalability, in terms of changing things over time and all that. So it's it's quite fun. It's a little bit daunting, I think, because there's so much technology and tools to learn. But at the same time, when you can get your head wrapped around it, there is so much opportunity and possibility.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a really good segue into what you're doing, Craig. I know you've taken a lot of that complexity away, especially at that enterprise layer.
Yeah, at the enterprise layer, Travis, to your point, right, Kubernetes deployment, microservice architecture, all the kind of stuff that IT has been, really looking at for many years is the approach that we took with the Fuuz platform. And we do this, what Lance likes to say is batteries included. So we provide infrastructure as a service, essentially, so we're, cloud deployed, public hosted or private hosted. And then once we land inside that DMZ with our gateway, we've got direct access to all their Ignition gateways running through all their facilities. If you subscribe to the red blue data concept, we're like the purple data, right? We're the thing that really sits in between, Ignition and the enterprise layer, so we can orchestrate, contextualize, govern, fully secure and all of that. So we really over the years have kind of taken an IT down approach, and I'm really excited about the partnership with Ignition because you guys are obviously the king as far as OT goes. And then just navigating all these different tools like you guys were talking about is so critical. We get prospects coming to us all the time saying, how do I implement, we want MES, right? I mean, they think MES is the solution to a lot of their issues. But we start peeling that onion back and it's, there's other issues, right? You've got data problems, you've got connectivity problems, you've got all these other things before we even talk about MES. And that's where they need guys like Dylan and Remis to help them really architect. There's just too many options out there. And some of them are misleading, let's be honest. There's a lot of things out there that sound really amazing and look amazing on paper. And I think a lot of companies have been, hit by that. And that's a real unfortunate situation where, Remis, you and I both as end users in the past, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I had failures. I'm sure you've had one or two. You got to learn those things and then, passing that forward, right? And sharing that knowledge with your clients. And it does still kind of amaze me how many manufacturers come into our door that aren't thinking about partnering with experts, to have that type of analysis and architecture assistance done. They're going to try to tackle it themselves, which is fine, more power to them, but
it's going to take you twice as long and probably cost you twice as much.
That's what we try to tell them. So having like all the four of us on this call is like, I don't know, whoever's watching this is like the most valuable podcast they're going to see all year.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Dylan.
I was going to keep going. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think one of the kudos we can give to Ignition, aside from just, being a great software package, is they really kind of created the community around this idea that it doesn't have to be, a one size fits all, that there is space in this for a lot of different software platforms, a lot of different companies to kind of be a part of this. And I think, kudos to them outside of the software. I think it just kind of naturally grew up around it, but I think also very intentionally from the Inductive side kind of created this collaborative mindset between, different companies. Because I would say, personally from the outside, I think Ignition and Fuuz probably compete in some spaces, but then there's probably also so much more collaboration between the two that can help companies unlock so much value that it's awesome that you guys are both here and open to share and be a part of it. And it's just cool from my end to see. It's awesome.
But I think to that point, like we believe in community, from the very beginning and the importance of that. I mean, if you come from the IT side, it is a community, right? There's a lot of great open source technologies that are out there that nobody's remaking the wheel, right? They're using what's out there and putting things together in unique and innovative ways. And today, like there's so many problems to solve, and there's so much work ahead of us that no one player can realistically handle that, right? You need to be able to have the community. And to me, I think the hardest part about that, Craig, you mentioned the noise. It's kind of hard to understand what's out there. And I think from our perspective, like from Inductive, we've really tried to to get through some of that noise and to show what the community has to offer, and provide that thought leadership out there into, there's how these tools work together. There's how, this integrates, and here's some examples, right? And this is why we love Prove It so much, because, Prove It independent is out there saying, look, we need to have open standards. We need to understand common digital infrastructure. We need to think about UNS, these really important concepts. And we need vendors to be able to play and work together. Could you imagine, look at the first time Prove It came, right? This last year in 2025 in February. I didn't know what to expect, right? I think we knew a lot of vendors are going to be, a lot of manufacturers are going to be there. But it was one of the most electric events that were there, because there was this feeling of we all can work together. We're not, while we might have some competitive overlap, at the end of the day, customers are going to choose our products and our solutions for the value and the merits that they have. And if they can put them together and win, that's what we're here for. We're here to make the customer's journey better. And so I think it's so important that community is here, and that we continue to think this way. And honestly, any player that wants to enter the space better think this way.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise, it's not going to win.
Yeah.
As we saw last year at Prove It.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
I
was
think,
amazing how many people, flew in, took their own time, time off work, unpaid, paid their own travel expenses to be at that conference to learn, and to network. It really proves what a need there is in the industry for something like Prove It. And I'm really glad that, ICC and Prove It are joined up now. So it just brings everything together for everybody, one-stop shop.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'd say that we are that's very important to not oversee is that there's a lot of manufacturing, right? And there's a lot of the big guys, the big players who have the resources and the time to be able to go and understand and put these solutions in place. You got a lot of small to medium-sized ones who, they're not even at the right part of their journey yet. There are a lot of companies who still don't even have, they still have clipboards and whiteboards. They still don't have data. There's a lot of silos of data. Still have information coming into a centralized control system. There's still a lot of legacy that's out there, and all they hear about is AI and all the cool things that are possible, but there's so much in front of them. It sounds like it's an overwhelming experience, and this is where it's really not. When you use the right tools and the right technologies and you understand how to put them together. So what Dylan's doing is so important to be able to be more prescriptive and show what's possible, and to be able to provide the education, that thought leadership, so that they can go and attack it and bring it into their systems and start getting those wins. That will then be a waterfall effect, cascade, right, to get more wins. So I think it's so important that we look as industry, to come together and provide that right education out there, so that everybody can take advantage of these technologies. This is for everybody, not just for a select few.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
democratizing it and making everything available. Yeah, even for the small mid-size, we talk to a lot, to your point, Travis. I mean, they're just so underserved. There's not a lot of tools that are built for them from a economic standpoint. It's hard for them to get the technology that the larger companies can get, and not all of those small manufacturers can afford to work with Remis and Dylan, unfortunately. So anything we can do to help.
Yeah, it's a great point, Craig, because most of our focus, while we will help small and medium when the fit is right, our focus and kind of the way we build our team is a lot on the enterprise deployment, because we feel like that's a pretty underserved market, right? Because to deploy Ignition or some other platform to 150 sites, it's a lot more than just building a screen and connecting some PLCs. You have to think about security, deployability, infrastructure as code, data management, data warehousing, data architecture, all of that starts to come into play. And to your point, very few companies actually have the resources internally that can do that work, right? That can spend the time to build an infrastructure as code to deploy Ignition to 150 factories and to do it in a way that's manageable, right? Now I deployed it to 100, and plant 101 comes up, and we have this new idea for a new screen or a new dashboard. How do we then go backwards to the first 100? So all of these things are something you have to think about when you're looking at a global deployment. And I think you guys are kind of hitting it right on the head with what you're doing there.
I think there's a fine line there too, a little bit of a fallacy that a lot of the medium businesses specifically can't afford it.
Yeah.
A lot of them, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, Remis and Travis, and even all of us here have probably seen this, is how many times have people said they can't afford it, put in the much cheaper solution where maybe it was 20K instead of 60K. Like it wasn't even that big of a difference. And a year later, because they went cheap, because they didn't know how to do it, they didn't do the upfront work, they ended up being 100, 200, 300, $1 million in downtime or loss or refactoring or having to rip and replace the solution that they should have started with something just not so far out of the realm that they couldn't afford it, but still something that was affordable to them, but they didn't believe it was affordable or they wouldn't afford it the mind share or attention.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a big mistake too that manufacturers make, and so for any of the manufacturers listening, you have to track the success of what you're doing, right? If you are legitimately trying to drive transformation and you're not measuring the dollar value that you're generating on the backside of it, your project's likely going to die after plant one because you didn't actually prove any value. You might have made some lives easier in the factory and got some wins there, but if you didn't track it, if you're not actually tangibly looking at the dollar gain from what you deployed in terms of, scrap reduction, uptime reduction, downtime reduction, however you want to look at it, or uptime improvement, I should say, then you're going to run into that same problem. Is like you delivered a win, but you didn't do a good enough job to showcase that you actually drove value. And so we see that with a lot of manufacturers too up front. And so it's a question that we always ask is, what does success look like after the first site deployment? Because we never start with 15 right off the bat, right? It's usually one plant. Let's show value in this one plant. And yeah, exactly, Zach in the chat. You got to prove it. You got to prove that you won. Like, what did you deliver? IT has to do it all the time, right? You're talking about the IT side. If they put in a new software, except for ERP, those generally don't have to prove anything. They just get blank checks all the time. What shows in that business? But yeah, I think it's super important to look at the success that you're actually driving to manufacturing.
Yep.
Well, I'd love to hear a little more of your thoughts, Remis, in terms of just it's about how companies actually drive that the transformations and how leadership actually what leadership's role into that is, because it's one thing to be able to just spin up a team and say, hey, we're going to be a digital transformation team, and then not really interface so much with the OT side or the folks that just say, hey, we're just gonna put tools on top, right? And we're gonna start getting value in doing these things because we can. That's not real true transformation. You're really just you may solve a particular use case, but you can't. How you scale that? How do you then go to the next one? Is how easy or hard is that? I think a lot of it is if companies can really from the very top set the right tone throughout the entire organization about how they should be transforming and how they should be communicating internally and also be very, very careful about what use cases they're trying to solve and how to approach solving use case. I think that's a huge part of getting to that success. And I'd love to hear from you. It's like, do you see that from the customers you're talking to?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. So after Prove It last year, we had a customer that come to us and, they saw all the great tech and they said, we want a UNS. We have to have a UNS. Okay, great. Why? And it's funny how often they can't answer that question of like, why do you want why do you think the UNS will drive value for yourself? And so it ended up, we had to go through quite a bit of meetings to get to the root cause. Don't get me wrong. I'll sell you technology all day long, but I want to have a prolonged relationship with you as well. And if I don't deliver value, I won't be around for very long. And so the obvious conversation is, why are you trying to leverage these technologies? What is driving the urge for you to look at the market and select Fuuz and Inductive and any of the other ones out there? Is what is actually the driving factor? Is it, hey, we have this plant in wherever the world and we have a problem. We just are down all the time. Great. That's a starting point. Let's start there. Let's use that to inform how we're going to build your unified namespace or whatever technology platform we're going to go down. Because if we have a success in mind, it's a lot easier to build towards that, as opposed to just, hey, we're going to take all of our company's data and drop it into this middleware layer, and we'll figure out what we do with it after that. Okay, great. Now you just built another data silo. You didn't remove anything. You just added another layer of complexity because you didn't actually think about what you're trying to build for. And the lesson I learned, during my time at Dana was you have to be intentional. in every decision you make in this space of digitally transforming a factory has to be intentional. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. Have an end goal in mind and drive towards that success.
Yeah, that goes really well into how we do workshops at Abelara too, when we're doing upfront stuff, whether or not we do the work later on for integration, we work with partners like Concept and Remis and such. But when we come in and do a workshop, we're having conversations with everybody from the on-the-floor maintenance staff and the operators all the way up through the CEOs. And it comes down to what are the ergonomics and what are the problems you're facing on the plant floor, but also what's the culture, what's the motivation, and what are we optimizing for as a business? So with the CEO, we're getting the conversation of what is the culture and what are we optimizing for? Are we trying to reduce costs? Are we trying to increase revenue? Or are we trying to increase quality? Usually it boils down to one of those three. But then once you know what you're optimizing for, what the business needs are, where the business is going, what's their strategy and what's their culture, then every decision you make down can be, as Remis said, intentional. And we can start to, when we're talking to the operators now, we know, yes, we have this problem, but this is why it's that way. And so even if we can't answer every one of their questions, or if we can't fix every problem, a lot of times we can explain why. And that explanation can do a lot more than a lot of technology can. And just getting that whole business aligned, everybody moving in the same direction towards that same goal, getting that rallying cry of what are we building? And then we can take those 10 steps back and actually start building.
Yeah.
And getting everybody on board has been huge.
Yeah, it's not every customer that, you know, is like the other one. We have one that we're working with right now that's doing a phenomenal job of really focusing on what are the gaps within our factories. Let's identify where we need to solve problems at a broader scale of an enterprise deployment. And then we can move forward into selecting the software and going through the rigmarole of how we're actually going to build out this technology. But let's really understand what we are as a company in terms of, you know, we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different manufacturing sites. Let's really understand what each one is doing, where their gaps, what they probably already have some software they built, whether it's Excel or, you know, something else. They have some software that they're using at some point. What are those areas that they're really focusing on, you know, trying to solve these things? And then how do you now take this new stack of technology and apply it to those problems?
Yeah, and I think it's also important that you know, companies themselves figure out what they want their architecture to look like. What do they want? How do they want their data to be modeled? Where do they want it to land? How do you foresee this? You own it, right? And then you get the tools. They're going to help make that a reality, because that's going to help. You're going to be able to drive that a lot better than if you're thinking, oh, well, this tool is going to be it for everything, and you know they're going to solve my problems for me. I think that's a big part of it. And then because when you look at attacking a new problem, you can put a solution in. If you put it in the right way from the get-go, it could be in parallel with a lot of old legacy stuff. That's perfectly fine. You can't replace everything day one, but you put in the new architecture and you slowly migrate with wins over to that new architecture. And you know, now you have a clear roadmap of where you want to go, and the wins are going to help. You know, they're going to be a catalyst for you to do more. And I've seen that time and time again. So it's just so important to like take that ownership of like, this is what we want. And because I love being on the call where like, this is how we want to do it. And like, yeah, let me show you how to make that happen. Right. Because that's much easier for me than try to dictate what you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's something I think I've seen all three of you personally do very well. Remis, you've had your hackathons, you go on site and build things real quick. Craig, I've been on your demos where you literally build solutions in like that hour and show on the call what you can do in an hour, and then boom, it's in. And Ignition with the 2-hour trial does that same thing for millions of people, I'm sure. I don't have the real numbers, but and I think that prove that value really fast is a big piece. And yeah,
that's huge for people. I mean, too many of them, to your guys' points, make the mistake of going technology first before having a plan. Yeah, we had a client that recently went live. They went with one of the big vendors, you know, in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and 3 months in, they realized that was not going to work. So that was a very awkward conversation that, you know, poor CIO had to have when he called me and was practically in tears on the phone. You know, so being able to take a step back and kind of navigate through what it is that your ultimate goals are at the end of the day, and then, working through that with someone, whether it's Travis, me, you guys, and really architecting the best solution. It might be one tool or many tools, but really focusing on that end goal, I think, is something that oftentimes gets overlooked in a typical evaluation cycle when these RFPs just get sent out that are a lot of times AI generated. Let's be honest. There's 600 lines on these things and yes or no answers, and that doesn't really add a lot of value to the organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, favorite
Yeah.
part of my job has always been, to just sit there and geek out with a customer and try to figure something out, try to solve something. And I love that. Some of my like the best memories over the years have been when a customer would come up to our offices for a couple of days, and we literally didn't have a specific plan. It was more like, hey, here's a couple things we're trying to do. Let's literally sit in here and build this together in these couple of days. So much innovate, like just so much comes out of it. Like even for us, because we get to learn like, what are we doing right or wrong within the product and how can we help make their journey better? And then also at the same time, we get to we get to help them move forward and do it in the right way that they want. I don't know. I just say that's like the funnest stuff that's out there. And that's where it's gotta be. It's gotta be focused in that way around solutions. Money comes later, right? Like all that comes later.
Yeah, the idea that, Dylan mentioned that we have this idea of a hackathon where we'll show up to a customer site and build a solution within, 3-4 days. That idea came from the time when I was at Dana, and we had a solution in place already that was causing nothing but havoc at this one plant that we were in. And I finally convinced my boss at the time. I said, give me a weekend. Give me 1 weekend. Let me show you how this should be done and how it could look. And I promise you won't be upset. So he did. He finally agreed after me just badgering him for 6 months, because I was sick of having to be on call at 2:00 in the morning just waiting for the SQL database to crash from too many inserts from the MES software. And so finally got him to agree to give me a weekend. We put Ignition in on one line in 24 hours, and that then enabled us to get the approval from our leadership to deploy to every single factory within Dana, which at the time was 165. So that enabled our leadership to go, whoa. Like, you can actually do this that quickly without spending $20 million? Like, wow, okay, how much do you need to go to every factory? And so it really was like the spark that was like, I was like, man, if I could figure out how to do that for other customers, that could be really interesting.
And there's so many great stories out there of just, with somebody who's smart, who has an idea and the motivation to do it, they can change the world. Just one person. With what they could put in place. And it's just so fun to be able to watch. I mean, I've seen multiple single engineers deploy to 50 sites, solutions or they were, maybe they were like a plant floor operator, they built something and then they got promoted up and now they're like running the digital strategy for the company. It's just so cool to see that because, it's really important in our industry to empower the right people. If we can do that, then that's where this amazing innovation is gonna happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got a question. I'm curious, Dylan and Remis, how are you guys seeing the adoption of UNS, especially at enterprise scale, and what kind of Remis? I can already tell by the expression, like what kind of challenges are you guys experiencing with that? I mean, we get asked about it all the time. Like every time we're talking to a customer, it's a big buzz, and I'm just curious. You guys are boots on the ground. Like, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can go first, and I'll pass it over to Dylan. I mean, I think we both echo this because Dylan and I chat quite a bit about just theory and practice and everything. I think the biggest thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just the symptom of it gaining so much popularity over the last year and a half, really, is that we have these customers, kind of like the one that I mentioned, that come to us with this idea that we need the UNS. And what a lot of them get stuck in the trap of, and we come in even after they've already tried to build the UNS, is that they built it without a goal in mind, and all they did was just create another data silo, right? The idea behind the UNS is to create a layer of interoperability for other applications to be able to leverage the data coming out of the different systems, right? You can do this with a lot of different technologies. There's a lot of different ways to structure the UNS, and we can get into a whole fun conversation about that. But fundamentally, what I think is the challenge of it right now, and what we're seeing is the pushback of companies that didn't do it with an endpoint in mind or with a goal in mind are now coming back and saying, okay, we did a UNS and we don't see any value. And it's like, well, the UNS on its own is not going to drive value, just like an MES system on its own or a SCADA system on its own is not going to drive value. It's how did you incorporate that technology into solving problems, right? The holy trinity, people, process, technology. It's not going away anytime soon. So you have to incorporate that strategy of a technology into the way you run your business. And I think a lot of the problem of manufacturers and companies that are just going gung-ho at the UNS idea is they're doing it just for the sake of building a UNS and not really thinking about how it's going to improve their company.
Yeah, I think for me, and it happens quite a bit, when a customer comes to me, when a client says, I want a UNS, my first and only question is why. And then after they answer that, they may or may not have a use case. Sometimes it's because somebody told them they had to or they heard about it online. Sometimes they have a real use case. And when they do have a real use case or otherwise, the next question is almost always, what does the UNS mean to you? Because depending on who you talk to and depending on which plant you go in who says they have a UNS, it might just be an MQTT broker with a couple topics, but nobody's subscribing to it. And they call that a UNS and it's good enough. And if missing any context, and it's exactly what Remis said, it's just another data silo. It's a message broker out there that's not sending messages to anybody. It's just an extra piece, sometimes for no reason. But on the other side, when you ask somebody who says they have a UNS, what is your UNS? It's a very robust integration layer with all sorts of context. And it's not just one platform. It's this more ecosystem play of integration between various systems in a much more philosophical way of integration, more so than it is one software or one technology that's bridging it. And the difference, in my opinion, between those two is the first one almost always heard a buzzword and put the technology first. But where what Remis was talking about there too, it's people, process, and then I say, and then technology. So if you don't know what who the people are and what the processes are, the technology is not going to help you one way or the other. And when you lead with technology, you get a MQTT broker with a couple topics in it that don't really mean anybody to anybody. But when you do a UNS starting with the people and the process, it really takes that form of that very robust integration layer and just an ecosystem more than anything.
So have you guys seen some good successes too, though? I mean, I know there's been a lot of non-successes, but is there any like examples, even without naming companies? But I'm just curious, like, to what extent or what degree have you seen a good, successful UNS deployment at enterprise?
You've talked about one with.
Go ahead, Dylan. Go ahead.
I was going to pass you the ball anyway, but I was going to say you've talked about one with IO Link and I think car washes quite a bit.
Yeah. So, a little bit outside the realm of manufacturing, we had a customer looking at kind of digitizing the idea of servicing car washes. And so the concept that we put together was kind of built around this idea that you would create a data layer that allowed all of this remote IO, which is essentially just very, very similar to a factory. It's a master link IO block that's feeding data over MQTT to an MQTT broker in the cloud, and then allowing us to build an application that's building off of all of that data. Instead of trying to build a point-to-point solution in every single car wash, let's build a data pipeline with a common data model, and then you can easily build applications on top of that. That was a super successful one. I think the other one outside of that, in terms of like a factory world, very large manufacturer, kind of really focused on how do we create this contextualized data model, really focused on the data modeling piece. They weren't focused necessarily on the unified namespace. They didn't really have that concept in mind, kind of answering one of the questions in the chat. But they had this idea that we needed to create a layer of contextualized data. So they were building a UNS without even really understanding that they were building one. And then once they figured out that, that is essentially the UNS and what else they could do with that, I think the capability for them to rapidly expand that into different use cases was super quick.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I think.
But I think it's still also like new enough that like off the top of my head, those are kind of the two I think of right off the bat. I think, we have a customer that we're working with from the ground up, like literally started from nothing, and now we're kind of going into it with this idea that we're going to build a UNS and build this framework. We actually have 2 customers in this space. And I think those are going to be tremendously successful because we're being intentional from the design of how we're going to connect equipment, how we're going to connect assets and software package systems, ERP, HR, PLM, SCADA, CMMS. How are we going to build an interoperable platform between all of these? And I think because they're being intentional in designing that from the beginning, it's going to be a really fun project.
And that's where I think, for me, most of the success stories I've seen don't start with the question of I need a UNS. They start with I've got this problem. I want to be interoperable. I want to connect my things in an easier way or a more efficient way. The people, almost all the success stories I know, a lot of them wouldn't even call it a UNS. If you're sitting alongside it and looking at it, you could probably call it a UNS and you know it when you see it type of thing. But they don't internally call it a UNS. They don't consider it a UNS. They didn't go in to build a UNS. They built an integration layer that some could look at and call a UNS. It was much more intentional.
Yeah, it's really again that mindset, like get away from proprietary locked in products, and the data itself. If we're going to get new data and leverage that data, when we approach putting the architecture together, do it in a way where we're exposing the data in a way that could be useful in more ways than one, right? And how you organize that data. I think it's really important about UNS is being able to do data modeling, right? The context of that data. And it's funny, as a lot of people, still don't even build in an object-oriented way, right? They don't think about what their standard model should be, and then let alone look at it from an entire enterprise standpoint, right? It might be one site is wildly different than another site. And so there's a lot of challenges there. And of course, there's also organizations who are trying to help, provide some standards around that. But at the end of the day, it's where we just need to fundamentally make data more accessible. And there are lots of unique ways to do that.
I think going back to a earlier comment Craig made too, is when he said sometimes Ignition's too loose, I see a lot of people still using Ignition without UDTs, just dragging and dropping tags right from a PLC. And there are people I've talked to who genuinely consider that to have problems with Ignition. And once I explain to them these other features, or look at the data model, look at the UDTs, use these other functions, then they love it. And one of the first things, that's kind of the difference between Ignition, and I don't necessarily envy you with Ignition having to meet use cases of everybody from controls and HMIs through SCADA, through MES, all the way up to IT integrations. You've got use cases and
dinosaurs.
User bases across the board.
Shout out Glenn Fry.
Oh yeah. But like Craig with Fuuz, that much more red or purple, as he said it, is you can't use Fuuz really well without starting with that model. It really funnels you through that standardized, start with building the model, and then you can unlock all the other doors.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of the evolution that's happened in the industry, right? In that when we first started, it was Modbus devices or PLC 5s or slicks that were we had to have a spreadsheet to know what addresses meant what, right? And then what ranges those were and so on, right? So it came just building tags with the right engineering units, and the ranges were really important to then getting into the kind of the UDT models and the importance of UDTs, and especially in how you can rapidly build applications and scale these applications later on, right? That object-oriented approach. There's a lot of people that once that light bulb goes off, they're like, oh my God, I would have always built it this way. You could build a project in Ignition that is completely dynamic, where you can actually drive the configuration from a runtime. Like, I want to add new things, but boom, here, answer questions, and everything gets added for you. Like, you could do that, but it takes kind of the mindset to be able to approach it that way. And so, it's pretty fun. Like, I always tell people in Ignition, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because there's so many ways you can do things. You could do it really, really well, and you can do it really, really bad. And we've had to help, people get out of bad implementations in the past. That's just the nature of it. But once you realize how to approach it, oh my gosh, there's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, and I think those
mindsets. Go to what you. What Travis said earlier, and then you can have it, Dylan. Just because you can build something doesn't mean you should.
Yes. I think the mindset piece is a big one there too, especially with the differences between Fuuz and Ignition. That's part of where the collaboration is really important, is even going back into the origin stories of how and who these tools were built for. Is with Ignition, from my understanding, it was very much, how do I get tags from PLCs to databases? How do I get data from this plant floor controller to a SQL database? Where with Fuuz, the story was, how do I get data from my ERP to the rest of the plant? And the attitudes and the mindset of people who are trying to get data out of the ERP versus people who are trying to get data out of the PLC are very different. And tools they've definitely converged. There's just some overlap in the middle, and there's a lot more broad intention and feature sets now. But that first intent, that first seed of why was this tool built, is very different mindsets, but coming to the same results.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and one of the reasons why we, here at Fuuz strategically wanted to establish a more concrete relationship with Inductive, right? And just understanding where we both add value to the enterprise and being able to come up with a first-class module that can really finally fully integrate the plant floor, SCADA, control layers with the enterprise layer. And whether you want to call it UNS or not, but the fact that we are data model driven, just out of the box is going to force people essentially down a path of scalability, whether they like it or not. So for those companies that have struggled with it, I think now teaming up with Travis here, I mean, we can finally offer a really robust solution. And they can call Dylan and Remis to come help them design it. So
Yeah,
I do truly
flip it back.
think, though,
I think
that a UNS goes across multiple products, in that, and it's how those can share information with each other in the right way, and be able to understand that data instantly, right, without having to do any kind of mappings and all of that. Because I don't think it's realistic to think you're going to have one thing that's going to be the whole UNS for your entire organization, right? And so that's where, again, it comes down to these standards and being able to how we can share information. And I do like what Sesme's doing, right? And what they're going to be talking about at Prove It with their i3x API, and how we can exchange information that's more than just real-time data, right? Getting historical data and getting at those models, those objects. I think that's going to be a crucial part here. Yeah, we're introducing some more standards, but if we get intentional standards that help us make our the job of our two products working together better, that's better for the customer.
yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah, there's so many nodes in the enterprise between, like Remis, you were mentioning, maintenance applications and CMMS, we got quality, we've got labs, LIMS, we've got all the MES, WMS. People forget about I think in the industry talks, I always hear about MES, IoT, SCADA. Very rarely do I hear about all the other layer 3 things like warehouse management, warehouse execution, ASRS. Like it's just such a wide net, and to be able to get all of these applications fully integrated and singing from the same sheet of music is obviously what everybody's aspiring to do, but it takes some work and it takes some standardization.
Yeah, and I don't want to like scare people away from getting started, because I think there is also value in day one, right? Just because you have these long-term goals and plans around, okay, we want to get to the point where we can do predictive maintenance or leverage AI at some level. That doesn't mean we have to wait until that is there before we can unlock value. There is still value as long as it's done intentionally and as part of the way you run your business, of just putting up a dashboard, right? Those lessons are that stuff is still there as long as it's part of the broader scheme, and you do it with the end goal in mind, right? The idea of start small, think big, scale fast. Like that stuff is still there. So don't be afraid of going right to just deploying a dashboard, because we still have a lot of customers that, like I think you were mentioning earlier, Craig, that are still paper and pencil. So there still is value to just that first digitization piece. I think our message, myself and Dylan, and I think everybody's here, is to just be intentional from day one, design it with the end goal in mind, but don't be afraid to unlock the value right away.
Talking about complexity of getting into things and moving forward, probably can't do a podcast without talking about AI and agents and how all those buzzwords keep things moving forward. So, yeah. I mean,
I'll go again. I think it's just kind of building on the same message, right? Like AI, I think, is 100% the end goal of most of what we're doing in factory connectivity right now, right? Like I'll give the teaser of a lot of what we're going to showcase at Prove It is the ability to leverage UNS data in an AI native framework with MCPs and agents and all that fun stuff. And we'll do it in a way that automates normal human workloads to rapidly solve manufacturing problems. I think that still is the idea. I haven't seen a customer really yet that has completely unlocked the value of AI inside of a factory, because I don't think we've really started to see what that could be, because we're still building this contextualized data layer. A lot of customers are, right? I mean, I don't see all manufacturers, but I see quite a bit. So I think that is there. I think there's still 1,000,000% value. I think if data is the new oil and AI is the combustion engine, I feel like the UNS and the idea and the concept of data modeling for factory data is the refinery. For the combustion engine to work, we have to refine crude oil and the gasoline, right? So you still need something in the middle there that's going to create that context around the data. And I think that's kind of where we are right now, is we're seeing some companies have leveraged AI and built some cool solutions on top of it. We've done a few with our customers, especially around predictive maintenance. But I think at wide adoption, we're still seeing that, like, where could this go as we're building this contextualized data layer?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big conversation for a lot of the different demos at Prove It. I know for us, we've got MCP servers in Timebase and Fuuz. We've got MCP servers in HighByte. We're going to be bringing Axelon so we can do a lot of DevOps, and they've got their AI almost vibe coding kind of thing going for Ignition. So that's going to be a fun one to show off. And even though the intent of none of the intent of our demos is to show AI, there's little bits of it in everything we're doing.
Yeah, for us, like I see there's two major use cases for AI right now around Ignition, right? One is that we will be doing an early access of our MCP module here pretty soon. We'll be releasing that on our forums. People can play around with that. We talked about it at our ICC conference, and the idea would be that we can expose all of the configuration from Ignition. We can expose all of the data models, the information, the history, the alarming. All that information can be easily brought to an LLM. And I think that's actually really exciting, because that standard is helping bridge that gap really fast, right? It was before, It would have been put this into a data lake and then figure out all these different tools and kind of build your own LLM to make all that happen. That was a pretty difficult task. Now it's so much faster. So that's one use case where I think we'll start seeing, a lot of products having these. Just makes it more possible for them to even have their own like local LM that operators can ask questions and can start getting at reasonable, really good answers from all the different tools that are there. The other use case that I think is really exciting is that we're also thinking about the world of there's a lot of legacy out there. A lot of small and medium-sized companies who have systems in place, but or older systems in place, want to get to modern times, and it can be a daunting task. They put a lot of investment and time into those tools. And having, getting integrators to just, rebuild them it could be expensive, right? But now we're in a place where AI is actually really good right now at building Ignition screens and building Ignition applications. I mean, it's incredible. I've been playing a lot more with it every day and just helping to just, build random things that I've wanted to do. And it's just incredibly good. Small tweaks here and there. But we're really close to being able to say, okay, let's actually put that back in our designer, have the ability for you to ask, say, hey, I want to build a project Ignition that does X, Y, Z, and boom, it's there. Or of course, I want to convert this system over to Ignition, right? Using screenshots or using spreadsheets or PNID diagrams or whatever, and get to, a project up and running now. To me, there's tremendous value there, because we can speed up this development time and reduce costs substantially to get to a place where we can have a foundation that allows us to go that next step, right? Where we want to go, and as Remis says, like, we could put Ignition in to solve, a particular use case. But then when it comes to saying, okay, now I got that, but I really want to, I want to get rid of all this old legacy, there's a lot of work in there. And so I think these are the two use cases that we're looking at pretty heavily. And a lot of integrators are also, trying to figure out that conversion piece, and to help with that. So I think this year, 2026, we're going to see an explosion of this, and more of these systems being converted and using AI to help build the config, because it's ready. It's prime time for that.
And it might not be too far off in presuming a future here where you could make a design either with AI or in Figma or something, get the MCP server from Figma, the MCP server for Ignition, do all the design work, and then just say, hey, make this in Ignition. Here's the tags. Done.
Yeah, I think equally, like, people say that AI is going to replace software developers. I don't think that's 100% true just yet. I think what you are seeing, though, is that software developers that know how to use AI are replacing those that don't. And I think the same is going to be true of our community of integrators, is the integrators that know how to use AI are going to rapidly, remove the need for the ones that don't. So as an integrator, if you're not looking at how to use AI in your everyday life of development and just running the business, you probably should be.
Yeah, software developers aren't going anywhere, but software developers are going to have a much deeper understanding of architecture more than they did in the past.
Yeah, it's just going to get harder, the architecture and infrastructure to support all of these solutions people want to use AI to build is going to have to be a lot more robust and able to handle so many more different edge cases. We build software, at Fuuz, it's very deterministic. We know what the use cases are. You start doing things like MCP tools and exposing infrastructure to LLMs, and you get all sorts of weird things. So I got in trouble yesterday from Lance because I built a whole app with Claude and loaded it in, and I was like shocked at just how good it was at first pass. Built all the schema, relations, screens, data flows in like 2 hours. I had an app that probably would have taken me 3 months in the past. So it's definitely come a long way, and I definitely want to learn more about what Ignition's doing with the MCP as well, because I think between the two platforms, that's a really powerful piece for IT OT convergence to be able to get at the infrastructure of both platforms through that tool is pretty crazy.
Well, Craig, we will be showing it off at Prove It. So
yeah, I'll be there.
Teaser.
And I think that goes back to what Travis was saying too about Sesame and the API they're doing, because once we get this same API talking to all these different tools with the same data models and MCP on top of all of that, now we've got common data models, interoperability, and all the AI tooling on top with all the context of those models. And that's a very, very big glue, in my opinion, to make all of this work really well together.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a fun space. I don't know. I mean, kind of go off topic a little bit, but I saw an article from someone at Google the other day that talked about that they rebuilt something that took them all of last year to build in a couple of hours with Claude Code. So these are, software engineers and developers at Google, and they're saying that, hey, we literally did what took us all of last year to do in a couple of hours. I think you'll see a lot of that in our space as well. Those that really are adopting how to use AI, and I mean, yeah, it's become my first question in interviews is how do you use AI in your everyday life?
Yeah, for sure.
In general, just even if it's like we were, talking before call of figuring out meal plans and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you're not constantly and intentionally looking at AI, you should be.
And using responsibly, of course.
You're responsible. Yeah, 100%.
But one thing that we're a software company, right? And so we, from very early on, our CTO Carl, he was very much like, we're gonna make this accessible to everybody, and not just our software developers, but we're gonna arm them with the tools to make them super programmers, right? And ultimately, the idea is to, you first you have to have that kind of acceptance that you should use it, and then secondly is how you drive it, show them how to use it, like get them to see the what possibilities are there, because once you integrate it in the right way into your workflows, like it's incredible the results that you can get.
Yeah. It's one of the really cool things about working for an organization like Reply is that we have an internal platform called Neurons, which gives us private access to all of the leading models. So Claude, Anthropic with Claude, Google with Gemini, AWS with their new tools, and OpenAI, and all these different platforms. We have access to it in a private environment that I can do and show, confidential information or anything like that. I mean, it's not as robust as you'll see like on the open market, but also it's way more secure than anything you'll see on the open market. So I think, we have to now go through as leaders in our company a lot of training around ethical AI, cybersecure AI, make sure you're avoiding, the capability of prompt injection and stuff like that. So there's so many different things, to your point, Travis, to do so responsibly. So, make sure as you're adopting all these great AI tools, you're doing so in a way that's not going to, expose your business.
Yep. Yeah, it's easy, I think, for a lot of companies to get a little overly ambitious and excited about it and start using it in ways that, is ultimately going to create more harm than good. So I definitely see that where you got to be careful. Again, use the right partner. Some of our customers have hired companies like you, Remis, to come in and help them with that strategy, in mindset, and make sure that it's safe and secure and scalable across the business. And not just letting all of your employees go, randomly sign up for Claude or ChatGPT and start using it with all of your confidential information.
Yep.
Yeah, you should
absolutely.
definitely look at having your own, that you get an account set up where it's more or less the information you put in there is within it's in your four walls, right? It's not going to be
Yeah.
leaked out there to public LLMs, because that is important, right? You don't want sensitive data to get out, and we have to respect in our industry. We've got lots of NDAs, lots of sensitive information that comes through every single day. So it is very important to think ethically and responsibly with this technology, but there's so much possibility that it can offer quickly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll flip that back to kind of, Craig and Travis, you guys, as we talk about, AI and the UNS, and you kind of asked us what we're seeing in the market. I'd be curious to see from a product perspective, how are you guys looking at these technologies like UNS and AI and all these other things? I think, Travis, you touched on it a little bit, but what is Inductive and, Fuuz doing in terms of building the capability to be able to leverage these things for your customers?
I can start here. For us, number one is to keep track and make sure that we're supporting the right standards in the product, right? There's a lot of different things that are out there, and for example, I am on the working group with the i3x REST API with SESME, because I do believe in that API quite a bit, and then also with the smart manufacturing profiles and that whole kind of initiative that's happening there, and we want to make that first class part of the product, to be able to support it. Now the other part is that for a lot of companies, Ignition, they have that at their site, at their facility, and all the data, whether it's coming from Ignition edges or other devices, are coming into the centralized. All this data is being contextualized. There's hierarchy, there's history associated with it, there's alarming, there's all this stuff. That tag database in Ignition is actually incredibly valuable, and that is a UNS, itself.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, it's about being able to expose that data to others in easy ways, right? Now, we've always been able to do like REST APIs. You can use web dev to expose your own endpoints, and of course, we can get data out through OPC UA or MQTT. That's just live streaming data, which is good. But this is where I think like, oh man, well, the i3x API says there's now this cool new opportunity where I can expose my entirety of the power of our tag database to a third-party application without them having to create a module inside of Ignition to get all that information. And I think this is the key, right? In my opinion, the key to making real true UNS is work across multiple platforms and products. And so I'm actually really excited to be able to showcase a lot of this in next month, because I think this is where the future is going to be with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And, with us on the AI front, it's largely around MCP and how we're going to leverage that and expose our infrastructure as tools. So we're at the point now where we can turn anything in Fuuz into a tool. Those tools can create other tools. Those tools can create new infrastructure. They're extremely powerful. Obviously used with caution, but that's kind of where we're taking it. I'm still really working on my dev team to get more and more adapted to AI as part of their workflow, and a number of them are. And we're seeing a lot of gains from that and our ability to churn through some roadmap items more quickly. I'm sure you guys are too at Inductive. As far as UNS goes, so our entire platform is an event-driven architecture. So the whole back end is effectively a UNS. And what we've tried to do over the years is build out these enterprise connectors for Google, SAP, Oracle, Snowflake, data, like every other enterprise system, from HR to payroll to maintenance to warehouse management. So As those systems become connected to the platform, they also become exposed through our standardized APIs, just like the SESMI profiles. But they also now inherently have MCP tools wrapped around them, even if they don't natively. They do in and by way of Fuuz at the enterprise layer. So that's the way our customers have been utilizing the platform as a way to extend what they've already got, right? So instead of having to go rip and replace an ERP to get the new version of SAP that's got REST APIs, doesn't matter, keep what you've got with remote function calls, expose MCP tools through Fuuz, and now you've just really upped your game without having to spend 9 figures on a new ERP system.
Yep.
And I will say, Remis, that
ERPs.
I think that we at Inductive, along with SiriusLink, have created some of that confusion that Dylan was talking about earlier in terms of UNS, right? Because, you have to ask people what they mean by UNS. When we look at OT networks and architectures, MQTT has transformed architectures, right? The things that were just simply not possible before, especially if you look at industries like oil and gas, where you used to have a centralized SCADA literally go pull over radio telemetry networks, all these PLCs, round robin, and to get the information coming in, it would be a long cycle to get that data coming in. You then now put an edge device out there, especially now with 5G and all that, who you can publish data back up to centralized system on change and have that available that's to subscribe to by the application. You have completely transformed the architecture. Now we look at just even manufacturing, the amount of data we're talking about today is just on levels of magnitude more than it was 15 years ago, right? We would have said a 50,000 tag system was big, right? And now we're in millions, and we're figuring out how to handle this kind of information, and it's difficult. But MQTT has helped make these systems more scalable in that way, and provided a unified namespace, if you will, right, of all the data that's coming in from all those different edge nodes. And so that is really, I think, critical for, MQTT and Sparkplug have been critical for getting industrial data delivered where it needs to go to the right, to multiple consumers, the right consumers, and to be able to make that data useful, right? And that is for a lot of people what they think of UNS, because it has given them that power. They know the use case they're trying to solve, and they've been able to do it because the technology enables them to do it, right? And I think that's really cool about it. And I fully, this standard is incredibly important, and we'll be, actually Sparkplug will have a booth at Prove It next month as well, which I'm excited about, along with SESMI is going to have their presence there too. So we truly believe, but then you have maybe Remis more of where you're looking, where a lot of the AI stuff comes into play. It's like the UNS of the enterprise, right? Like that is getting all the data with context and history and all that information that needs to be brought in so that we can actually do these higher level analytics off of that data. And that there's no easy button right now, right? We're trying to figure that piece out as a collective industry and how we approach it. And this is where the work that you're doing, Remis, and the work that Dylan's doing is incredibly important in being able to help, get rid of some of the noise and figure out what are the practical ways that we can do this. And so that's actually gets me really excited about UNS, Remis, is there's so much opportunity here for how we can actually take data at scale that coming from us and Fuuz and many other platforms and put it together.
Yep. And I think on that note, that's a really good one. I think just like we talked about with the origins and the intent of Fuuz and Ignition, it's really important to remember the origin and intent of MQTT as a protocol as well. And that helps ground a lot of things. And I think that would make a very good topic for a follow-up conversation if anyone's interested in the future. But to be respectful of time and everything, we are over the allotted time for the show here.
Oh, no.
Could keep going,
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Anyway, yeah. So thank you, everybody, for being on. Thanks for your time, and hope the audience appreciates everything we said. I think it was a very valuable, very good conversation.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the
Thanks,
next ones.
Dylan, Craig, Travis, always a pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.